The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast are those of the speakers or authors and do not necessarily reflect or represent the views and opinions held by the producers of this broadcast. The material herein is for entertainment purposes only.
Welcome to another episode of Scary Stories with Kalila, coming to you live from New Orleans, and we have Alan Gilbreth coming to you live from the wonderful city of Memphis. Welcome, Alan.
Good evening.
We have a really fun show tonight.
We do.
Because we've got really scary stuff. Somehow, a lot of people think that which might not be true, but just fictional, is scarier. We're talking vampires tonight, folks. But there's been a lot of vampire-like crimes that have occurred throughout history, all throughout Europe, all over the world, here in the United States, and especially here in New Orleans. So I'm going to share with you a little story about one of our vampire-like crimes that occurred. And this was in the 20th century. This was in the early 1930s. There were a couple of brothers, and the names had been changed at some point in time after their execution, but we did find execution records on these guys, and they were actually hanged. They tried them in another parish. They brought them on the other side of the state, but nonetheless, as the story goes, they are referred to as the Carter brothers. A couple of guys with the last name Carter. Now, these people are just regular guys. They got regular jobs. I mean, they weren't a whole lot to look at. Very average-looking guys. Nobody you would even notice on the streets. One was about 35. One was pushing about 40. Very unassuming characters. But they got a lot of attention in the fall of 1931 when a 9-year-old girl ran into the police station and reported a crime, a very heinous crime, that had been committed by these two men. She had been enticed in off of the street, and once inside, they tied her to a chair. And with a very sharpened object, they cut down into her wrist and drained some of her blood into a little cup, and they drank it. They bandaged her up, but they repeated this for several more nights in a row. Each night, she's growing weaker and weaker and paler and thinner. Well, that last night, they didn't tie her up quite so well. Now, she's a young girl. They're not real worried about her. But she did manage to escape. She got out of the building. She reported the crime to the police, and the Carter brothers were taken into custody. Now, when the police got down to their apartment, much to their surprise, there were 4 other victims, also tied to chairs, also with a wrist bandaged up. There was an adult male, an adult female, a 14-year-old boy, and a dead 9-year-old girl. Each one of the survivors gave the same account. In yet another room, there were numerous bodies that were stacked up on top of one another like cordwood. It's undetermined how many people the Carter brothers actually killed and what they might have been doing with those bodies. Now, because there were survivors, there are, of course, witnesses. The Carter brothers were, of course, eventually tried. They were convicted and eventually executed. Now, for a very long time, some people said, in fact, the lady that first told me the story was an elderly lady at the time. I'm elderly now, but at the time she was an older lady who lived in the apartment, and she had told me this story as if she remembered it. Let's put it that way. And she said she had believed that they had been executed, but electrocuted by a very crude electric chair. But the fact of the matter is they were both hung, and they were hung in a different parish outside of New Orleans. Now, what's very strange is that after they moved out of that house, they left that house, and of course, in time, the place was renovated. It started getting other tenants. But over the years, they've seen people who fit the description of the Carter brothers in and around that apartment. Now, they're not attacking anybody. They're not bothering anybody, but they'll see them in the stairwell. Now, this particular building, there's a business down at the bottom, there's apartments up at the top, and you have an entranceway over to the side with stairs that go up into the apartment areas. They will be seen in the stairwell. They'll be seen on a balcony. Some people have seen them inside the apartment, and the minute somebody sees them, they disappear. They take off. So, what do we have here? Are they really vampires? Or are they merely the ghost of people who tried to be vampires?
Well, it depends on how you define a vampire. I mean, that's pretty much about as good as you're going to get. I mean, every society in history has a legend or some kind of spiritual being that is basically, for all intents and purposes, some kind of blood-centered entity, a vampire, if you wish. Blood crimes. I mean, we can go back to the ancient Aztecs. Let's go catch the guys in the village next door, take them on top of the pyramid, and let's cut their hearts out. When you get to, at least for the Western world, one of the penultimate sins of all times is anything related to some form of cannibalism.
Yeah, that's a big no-no.
Yeah, that's just, for every civilized group of humans on the planet, eating somebody else is a no-no. I mean, that's just as big a taboo as we can get. And drinking their blood, guys, that's cannibalism.
Well, it is. It is in a sense. It really is. I mean, throughout history, though, blood has been very symbolic at some point in time. In warring tribes, people would drink the blood of their enemies because they believed it would take on their power. That was very, very... Eat
their hearts, different body parts and different powers. Yeah,
to take on the powers. In fact, the real Dracula in Transylvania, there was a lot of rumor, of course, about him being a vampire, but the fact of the matter was he was a warrior. And it is said that where a lot of the rumors came from about him was that when he had killed many of the people that he killed, at some point in time, he dipped his bread in their blood and would eat it as symbolic to take on their power.
Well, and a lot of what we have about Vlad Tepes is also propaganda. Of when you're trying to overcome somebody, he was the prince of a tiny little country surrounded by very big powers, and he knew. I think he truly knew the power of innuendo and rumor, so that if you come to Wachovia, we're going to eat you. We're not just going to kill you. We're not going to beat you. We're actually going to eat you, or we're going to stick you on a pole and just leave you up there like a window dressing. That is powerful images. And if you're the opposing person trying to invade his country, you got to think really twice about that. Do you really want to be put on a tree? Do you really want to be somebody's lunch? I mean, you think about the hero's death in battle. It's going to be an honorable fight to the death. And the other guy goes, oh, no, dude. When we're done with you, I got a frying pan over here. The mental anguish, of that. So,
when they would come into the village and see people on stakes, people who had been impaled, people who were beheaded with their heads on stakes. I mean, that sends a powerful message because it says you're next.
Yeah, don't cross this line, or you could be, So I mean, the minute we kind of get back in history and we start looking for the terror that the Carter brothers inspired. Because can you imagine the thoughts of the police walking in and finding this scene?
Oh, it's horrible. It's horrible. Of course, it is New Orleans. I mean, it kind of, I think we've had quite a few of those kind of deals. I think we've had a few of those kind of deals along the way.
Yeah, but
yeah, it was pretty horrific.
But could you just imagine being, a beat cop his day at work, and you walk in, you find these people that are being milked for their blood? I can't think of a better word. They're being kept like cattle. Yeah. And when they die, we're just going to stack the body over here for later.
Yeah.
Pretty bizarre. Even in modern times, when you get to something like a Jeffrey Dahmer, I mean, we still have trouble wrapping our minds around the fact that, it's not that he killed people. They came up missing parts. He actually ate them. That's oof. And now we get to the we're heading into we're heading into the spooky season of the year, and zombies and werewolves and vampires and mummies and all these wonderful things are suddenly on the thought. But why does something like this scare us so badly? I mean, just the thought of being helpless, tied to a chair, and some maniac comes by and taps you for a pint of blood every so often. I mean, what a horrifying way to watch yourself go.
Although, and we'll come back after a break, the other side of the coin is, look at the allure of the vampire. I mean, this heinous, hideous monster of a creature who is fed upon humans since the dawn of time. Every civilization, every culture, every religion had a vampire or a vampire-like creature in their folklore. Mm-hmm. Since the dawn of time, they have existed. But yet, we have this love-hate relationship with the vampire. I mean, look at what happened with vampires of fiction and the allure of the vampire. So when we're going to come back, we fear them, but why do we love them? We'll be right back.
Submitted for your approval. New Orleans. Seductive, magical, mysterious, and haunted. There is no place on this earth with as much ghost and vampire activity as New Orleans. Imagine, if you will, a tour. A tour that takes you to sites in the French Quarter of actual documented hauntings. The Haunted History Tour is just that tour. Every day, every night, all year round. This tour has been featured on ABC, CBS, NBC, and CNN. And it's available to you. Are there ghosts and vampires in the French Quarter? Find out by taking the tour that everyone is talking about. The Haunted History Tour. For more information, call Haunted History Tours at 861-2727. That's 861-2727. This is not a Halloween spookhouse. This is real.
Okay, we're back. So let's talk a little bit. I mean, Allan has written a couple of vampire novels. He's an expert on the fictional vampire. I mean, he has patterned his character. And just about every fictional character since the beginning of vampire literature, usually they are patterned after someone real from history, after folklore. And there's a lot of, truth behind some of the legends. But nonetheless, always, they're a character that we love to hate, but then they're a character that is very alluring, very sensual, and very seductive. So, Allan, I mean, tell us, you as the author.
Well, we have to start with the word taboo. The vampire represents a lot of things you ain't supposed to do. Now, we'll just start right there. One, it's going to drink human blood. It's going to prolong its own existence by siphoning off the life of those around them. And the vampire is a little more like a mosquito in the fact that, it doesn't necessarily have to kill you. the savage media vampire is kind of a relatively recent invention in the movies. Because special effects people love to make things splatter. But if you go back to your early classics, let's go back to Bela Lugosi. You didn't have throats being ripped out and heads flying off and this kind of stuff. It was a lot scarier. I mean, Dracula fed on you repeatedly. Mina Harker was visited many times by Dracula. She wasn't a one-time victim. And he had numerous other victims around. And at some point, if he chose to, you could move from being a victim to a vampire. So you could cross that line. So you went from prey, you could become a predator.
Follow me, Kalila Smith, into the mysterious world of spirits. Searching for Spirits, the ultimate guide for ghost hunters, is a concise how-to manual for anyone who enjoys a good ghost hunt. Learn the history of spiritualism, learn what a ghost is and what is not, learn the truth about poltergeist. We'll also delve into the realm of spiritual beings that never were human, the world of demons, real vampires, and we'll look at some real case studies. This is a must-have for everyone interested in ghost hunting, from the novice to the expert. Completely updated in its second edition, this is one of the first guides for ghost hunting based on actual first-hand experiences. Available on Amazon.com. Searching for Spirits, the ultimate guide for ghost hunters by Kalila Smith.
When I got ready to write about vampires, I'm sitting there watching the news one night, and a gentleman just got convicted of embezzlement. Basically, what he had been doing was defrauding women. Gentleman is probably in his 50s, probably not too dissimilar to myself, kind of average looking and that kind of thing. And basically what his MO was, he would kind of roll into town. He would meet a woman of an appropriate age, at least in her 40s or early 50s, who was obviously successful. And, then the romance would begin. It would be just kind of this, whirlwind event, because, successful, busy people don't have a lot of time. So, things kind of move very quickly. And he always presented himself as having this kind of fantastic job, like he was a diamond exchange merchant, or he worked on, bearer bonds, or, there's always something that you knew people actually did, but you probably never met one. And then there would always be a problem somewhere a few weeks into the relationship where, gosh, my millions of dollars is stuck in some bank somewhere. Can you buy me a set of tires and I'll pay you back? And the minute that relationship got rolling that way, he would basically defraud these people. So he's, winning their hearts, winning their pockets, and cleaning out their bank accounts. And the frightening thing is how fast this would happen. This would happen over 5, 6, 8, 12 weeks. And during the time he's romancing and winning over and defrauding this one, he had 2 more working in nearby cities. So, I mean, this guy, this was a full-time job. And, finally he's captured. Finally he's, convicted. And I'm sitting there watching that, and I went, wow, so this guy swept into your life, swept you off your feet, and then basically left you a beaten-down husk in a very short period of time. And I went, that's got to be a modern vampire. This is somebody just utterly using you for their ends. And I don't mean just, hi, I'm a Nigerian prince, I'm stuck in space, send me a bank account. It wasn't that obvious of a scam. I mean, this was personal. This was wining and dining and moving into the house, and this was deeply personal. And then, 6-8 weeks later, he's just gone. And your bank account's gone and your credit cards are all run up and he's off doing it to the next person. And I thought, that's basically draining somebody's life. So that's where the personality traits that I felt embodied a vampire came from. Is that, you are, I believe as a friend of mine put it once upon a time, you're a box of chicken McNuggets. It's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when. This person's, you're just a means to the end of this person. So when you get to the fictional vampire, that really carries over quite heavily. Whether it's cool and stylish like Bela Lugosi's, but Bela was the bat, Bela was the vampire, and he was aristocratic and had the cool cape and had the really neat eyes that he stared at you with, and was the creepy little man that scared people out of their wits for decades. To now we have exceedingly very fit vampires that are the beautiful people battling the muscular people that turn into werewolves, and so I mean the aristocratic view of the fictional vampire is still definitely with us. And the scary part is, you and I did some panels in the past where it was like we asked the audience what was scarier, whether it was a zombie, a werewolf, or a vampire. And different parts of the country had different things they were scared of. And New Orleans, universally, to a person in that audience, agreed the scariest of the three of them was the vampire, because you didn't know who it was. That vampire could be at the end of the bar from you. That vampire could be your waiter or waitress. That vampire could be that really cool looking enigmatic person out there standing under the street light in the fog with the cool accent that said, "Good evening, how are you doing?" So that's what terrifies people, I think, with the vampire. And even in the fictional vampires, the book vampires, the movie vampires, the game vampires, the idea is that basically the vampire, unless it reveals itself, looks just like you. There's supposed to be little clues to give you a hint that it's a vampire, but it's Friday night in New Orleans. Who's looking for vampire clues?
A lot of people I know, but anyway.
Yeah, anybody that knows the two of us. But if you're out for a good time, you're out, doing all of the entertainment things that a French Quarter has to offer, and you meet somebody of the opposing gender that's kind of grooving on you and start showing you around, and how hard is it to find yourself possibly isolated and in a compromising position? Suddenly that gets really terrifying. It's kind of like being an antelope and suddenly finding out you're at the lion's house.
Yep.
So, it's, vampires are scary, and there's, and of course there's the legend that once you've let one in, they're impossible to get rid of. Now, I don't mean if that's, means a vampire is, in-laws. But, there's lots of little tricks, in Japanese culture. If you're being chased by one of their blood demons, you have to run across a zigzag bridge because they have to move in a straight line. Or that you can throw beans at the door and they have to count them before they can come in. There's always a way of escaping them.
Yeah, that's a lot of that.
But
it's a little tough, little tricky. But I tell you what, let's take a little break again, and when we come back, maybe we'll talk about some of the differences in some of the vampire of different cultures.
Oh, yeah.
We'll be right back.
Imagine it's the year 2020. With so many podcasts, streams, and interesting stations, you've finally found your paranormal hotspot. We want to personally invite you to join the discussion by tuning in and listening to The Seance Room. With all new and returning guests, intriguing investigative explorations, and scintillating conversations with the beyond. Welcome to The Seance Room.
Haunted airwaves, conversations with the beyond, chilling messages from spirits and odd interviews. The spirits are going live.
Okay, so we're back. Alan, so, I mean, there's a lot of different cultures and a lot of different ways. I mean, like you're saying, the Japanese had one way of doing it. And traditionally, the European vampire. In the very beginning, the revenant coming up out of the ground. I mean, this was a rotting corpse in a death shroud. There was nothing glamorous about this. But, early Eastern European vampires, and there was a lot, I think the Eastern European people had the most documentation of vampire folklore than any other culture. And it was interesting because a lot of those early stories, the vampire was coming back doing things. There was one guy who would come back and work the fields. He would get out and plow the fields of his neighbors. But always, one of the things, and this is where that allure comes in and that sexiness of the vampire, was that in these early tales of the European vampire, the vampire was still having relations with the spouse. And that was one of the things of vampire folklore. Now, I'm sure this stemmed from the, widow who would, suddenly pop up with a baby. And of course she would say, well, my husband's still visiting me. But,
somebody's husband, but yeah.
Somebody was, but anyway,
yeah.
But no, usually in these folklore stories, it was, they were still having relations with the wife. Now they were coming back and they were feeding on the rest of the community. Usually they would go after the family first. The blood the closest to your own was the sweetest blood. So you go after the mother, the father, siblings, children, not that spouse though. Of course, the spouse isn't supposed to be family.
Well, welcome to a small village.
Yeah, right.
Well, all right, there's kind of a twist you got to throw into this, and it was the fact that you could be declared dead. You could be, so Bob's been a member of the village, but, Bob kicks the dog and yells at the wife and doesn't get along with anybody, so the person in charge of the area basically excommunicates Bob, or they throw Bob out, or they declare Bob dead. By declaring Bob dead, they can divest him of all of his worldly goods, and they can basically just get rid of him. But of course the problem is you still got family, and now suddenly Bob's a parasite. Bob, we told you to get out. Bob, we told you were dead to us. Go away. But now Bob is still coming back, and now he's living off the family. He might still show up and plow the fields. He might still sneak home at night and, keep the bereaved widow company. So I mean, there are some cases like that where somebody was declared dead, but it was more of a punishment type thing. But then you start blending it in, and now suddenly you're kind of like, oh, this gets complicated.
Yeah,
we have to think about rabies at this point when you may bring up the revenant crawling up out of the dirt with the death shroud still on it. We are scared of rabies today, but we don't actually. You don't really actually know anybody that ever had rabies. It's one of those diseases. It's still around, but thank goodness it's not widespread, and there's medical treatment for it, and it could still happen. But you think about Middle European times more than 100 years back, and this had to be a terrifying disease. Because if you got bit by a bat or a wolf or a skunk or something, then you went into all the stages of the disease, and the final stage was, you've had all this neurological damage. You're completely out of your mind. You're just walking rage. And if somebody had, thought you had passed away in the night and they had wrapped you up and you woke up in the morning, you woke up crazy. You were no longer Bob anymore. Yeah, that's true. And so now you're destroying the house and you're trying to bite people and you're trying, so suddenly the Revenant is just this horrible, terrible thing. And really, how do you deal with something that's infectious, that's trying to grab you and bite you and kick you and be really aggressive? I mean, that's just got to be, this has got to be terrifying. And we know this really happened. It happens today. You see animals today, they get rabies and the crazy things that they will do. Yeah. Well, the people were just as bad. So the Revenant's there. Let's jump to another culture. Let's go over to, we'll pick on Asia, and they've got a variety of demons that get blood out of humans from, let's just say, a wide variety of sources. So, everybody knew that blood attracted these things that weren't good and were bad for your people or bad for your culture or bad for you, definitely. And if you think about a lot of modern conditions we have today if you had a dermal virus that caused your skin to bleed, that had to be the sign of being possessed, didn't it?
Oh, that's pretty horrible. Yeah.
You think about these things, just good old fashioned. They had leprosy
back then too. People had leprosy in certain places.
Well, think about the heartbreak of psoriasis. It's not brand new. Skin conditions and that kind of stuff. These are not new. Hemorrhoids were not invented by Preparation H. These are conditions humans have had all these years, and they have different physical effects. And, how did you explain this 300 or 400 years ago?
I don't know, but it had to be pretty awful.
We know
that this is, these are the things that caused, even the plagues of Europe, a lot of them are blamed on vampires because they believe that, the vampires came back from the dead and would bring the diseases and they would feed on the rest of the community. And then people would start dropping like flies. So, a lot of that was blamed on vampires.
Vampires and witches.
The word Nosferatu literally means plague carrier or disease carrier. Then of course you had your werewolf. That definitely came from rabies. Some hermit goes off and lives in the forest and, he gets bit by something and he comes back and he's this hairy,
unkempt thing, uncontrolled rage running around trying to bite the cat. And, it's...
Right.
You just gotta have to put on the goggles and go, all right, you're a normal person, but you're living in this time. And in this time, there are no antibiotics. There are no hospitals. There's no, he's just got a cold. There's no...
Yeah, they didn't know what any of that was. Yeah.
Gesundheit actually meant go with
everything
God.
Was blamed. Yeah, everything really was blamed on the supernatural. Anything they couldn't understand was blamed on the supernatural. So any kind of disease, death, and a lot of the vampire folklore comes from the misunderstanding of the decomposition process.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of the practices that were done after someone would die, digging the body up, sticking a stake in the heart, cutting a head off. A lot of these things came from, determining... They would bury someone and maybe it was wintertime. Maybe the body was preserved a little bit more. So they would go out. The gypsies of Eastern Europe would actually go out with a horse and see if the horse would jump over the grave. And if the horse reared up or backed up, the dead would be dug up. Now,
And the gums would have receded, and the teeth would look bigger.
The gums recede.
The nails would be longer.
The nails look longer. The hair look longer.
Yeah, my little beard might be a little longer.
Because, yeah, so it looks like, and then, of course, the body's, bloated. It's all engorged. And when they stick that steak in it,
explodes.
The gases release a sound. So, the creature moaned. Blood gushes out of the mouth, or at least liquids do, and it looks like they're engorged with blood. So a lot of these tales came from all of this misunderstanding of the death and, the disease, the decomposition process, a lot of these things that people just really didn't understand.
Well, that's why we have headstones, was to keep you from sitting up in the grave.
Well, do you know that in some places, in some cultures, talking European and up in New England and all, if the headstone is tilted,
you tried to get out.
It meant that you tried to get out. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
You tried to get out, and that was a sign of a vampire. I mean, look at the vampires of, I don't know if you're familiar about the vampires of New England, but up in Rhode Island, there were vampires, and it turned out it was actually a tuberculosis outbreak.
But you're coughing up blood.
And people were dying.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're coughing up blood. You're getting delirious from the fever. You're, of course, seeing dead relatives coming back to get you. And, one of the most famous of the Rhode Island vampires was a girl by the name of Mercy Brown. And, the Brown family had several children who had died from the disease. The wife had died from it. Mr. Brown had just Mercy, and her brother left.
Mm-hmm.
And then when Mercy fell ill with tuberculosis, he tried everything to save her, to no avail. And it was winter when Mercy died. They put her in a vault because the ground was frozen. So when they finally buried her, and the father went out, by the time the son got sick, the father went out and dug her up. And she had not decomposed. And this man, anguish of this man. This man has buried his whole family. He's just dug up his little girl. His son is sick, and he took the heart out of that little girl. The stone is still there next to the grave site where he put her heart on the stone and burned it to ashes and took the ashes home and fed them to his son in a last-ditch effort to save him, because that is what the folklore said to do.
Mm-hmm.
The child, of course, died.
Oh, not understanding bacteriology or infections, right? It's
right, and all of this was from tuberculosis, but they had no idea what it was. They called it wasting away. They had no idea.
The wasting disease. It was like a family curse.
Yeah, they called it consumption.
Yep. You were being consumed by this disease, and it was induced in many cases by the lighting they used in the house, because the gases given off from the oils and stuff they were burning were often, let's just say, less than hygienic.
Oh wow!
Well, that's partially why whale oil.
It's horrible.
Well, yeah, it's partially why whale oil became so popular, is it didn't kill you of consumption.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that. Didn't know that at all.
So, that's
yeah, it's really horrible, yeah.
It's weird how these things domino from one thing to another. Being scared of vampires in a weird, indirect way, gave rise to the whaling industry. Because it was an oil you could burn and people didn't die of consumption, and you didn't come back and eat the family. So it's kind of weird how these things bizarrely intersect with each other. So,
We're on that note, we're going to take another break, Alan, and we'll be right back. Step beyond the veil that separates our world from the world of spirits with me, Kalila Smith, as we uncover the mysteries of the afterlife. This is a spiritual journey as we try to discover if life really does continue after the physical death. Are after-death communications real, or do we imagine them? Get my book, Afterlife Mysteries Revealed, and find out. Afterlife Mysteries Revealed, available on Amazon.com by Kalila Smith. Okay, so we're back, and while we're on the subject of all of this, people getting diseases and vampirism being spread from one person to the next, let's talk a little bit about those survivors of the Cody brothers, because it's very interesting what happened to them. Because as you recall, we had, of course, the little girl who reported the crime.
Right.
She was not there long enough. I think she was only there like 4 or 5 days. Now, according to folklore, you had to be fed upon at least 7 times or more and survive in order to become a vampire. So now, as far as we know, this little girl, she reported the crime, she was taken to the hospital, treated for her injuries, returned to her family, and for all we know, she lived a perfectly normal life. Now, but we had 3 other victims that were there, and those victims were there at least a week, fed upon at least 7 times. The female who was there, she, as far as we know, she did not become a vampire or think that she was a vampire. She was released from the hospital, however, and taken into the custody of the state mental facility, where she did spend the remainder of her life. We really don't have privy to her records, and we don't know what she was experiencing. The adult male survivor, now this could have been solely psychological, just bear this in mind, we're going to be rational about this. He went on, his name was Philippe Trufant. He went on to kill over a dozen people, drink their blood. He was living on Bourbon Street near St. Philip Street, right over there by the blacksmith shop. And he was getting rid of the bodies by dissolving them in sulfuric acid and dumping the remains into the Mississippi River. He did this for like 12 or 13 years. I think it was 1949 when he had his last victim. Now, this guy actually kept a diary. Believe it or not, he kept a diary of some of the things that he was experiencing. He described in this diary having very weird dreams from his experience. Now, of course, the guy's traumatized. Of course, he was having bad dreams. Of course, he had PTSD. But he basically describes his transition of going through being that victim and then becoming the one who's victimizing. Now, was he a vampire? We don't know. But we do know that he reenacted what happened to him. Now, it's very common, of course, as you know, in any kind of abuse case, that the abused person becomes the abuser. All we do know about Philippe Trufant is that his last entry in the journal stated he had one more victim who was dissolving in the acid, and he was going to go dump the body in the Mississippi River, and after that he planned to leave the city. But we have reason to believe that maybe Philippe didn't make it back from that last trip to the river. We don't know what happened to him. I mean, this guy was a wealthy guy. He had nice jewelry. Who knows what might have happened to him? Somebody might have hit him over the head. Somebody might have been watching him. Somebody might have been blackmailing him. We don't have any idea. All we know is he made that entry, and then he disappeared. But it wasn't until many years later, when the building was renovated, that the journal was actually found behind some bricks in the fireplace while they were renovating it. And the thing just falls out, and it's a blueprint of what he did. And it's in the custody of the NOPD archives.
Yeah.
So we don't really know what happened with him. Now, the most interesting case, of course, though, was the young boy. He was 14 years old. Now, he was taken to Charity Hospital. He was treated for his injuries, and he was eventually released into the custody of his father, a single parent living outside of the city. I think the guy lived like down in St. Bernard Parish or somewhere in one of the fishing towns. But we really don't know what happened to that boy, but we do know that a few years after his release, his father tied him to his bed and walked out of the family home and burned it completely to the ground with his only child inside. When he turned himself into the police, the only thing he said to them was, "I did what I had to do." That was no longer my son. He was taken to the state mental facility where he spent the remainder of his life.
You know, that seems kind of a weird common theme down there with you guys. Just pointing out.
Just saying, right?
You know,
it is. I mean,
there's a lot of your stories that end.
What these people experience.
Yeah, and then we took them to the asylum. You know, there's a lot of stories that end that way down there.
Well, I mean, what do you do with people? I mean, you know.
Well,
the unfortunate thing is they got rid of all the asylums. So where are all these people now on the street, right?
Sadly.
Now that's scary.
No, well, sadly.
That's a scary thought. We don't have asylums anymore.
No, we do not. And
no, so they're on the street. I mean, they're on the street. We have stuff happen all the time. I mean, you know, I mean, I've told you some of the stuff that just happened the last couple of days, just within 24 hours, some of the crazy stuff that's happened. And, you know, the people that should be possibly in asylums are on the street.
No, so I guess our big question of the night as we are sitting here in the scary season of the year, would you say vampires exist? Yes or no? I'm going to have to say
I never say they would exist or not.
But I'm going to have to say, while I don't think the supernatural leaping over tall buildings and turning into a bat exist, I'm going to say the terrifying feeding and preying on a human being type vampire as a mental disorder most certainly does exist. And
absolutely,
I will agree with all of those people from all of those shows all those years, Kalila. The vampire is the really hard one to find because they could look just like us. You don't.
And they do, and that's just it. I mean, what else would they look like? They're not going to look like your vampire in fiction. You know, for the longest time, you know, in the 1990s, you had a big craze with the vampire culture.
Everybody wanted to be Lord Byron. Vampires. Yes, everybody was going to be Lord Byron.
Well, yeah, you know, but you know, you think about it. If one were a vampire today, they're not going to be walking around dressed like Anne Rice vampires or Lord Byron in that clothing, in that, you know, they're not going to be doing it. What are they going to do? They're going to blend in.
They're going to blend into the environment they feel most comfortable in. So the trick is,
so what are they going to look like? They're going to look like you or me.
They're going to look like an artist.
Like regular people.
They're going to look like a barista. They're going to look like the person that could attract the right kind of victim.
That's exactly right. And they could be anyone. Your neighbor. You know.
Yeah, we always get those words. Baker. Well, he kept to himself and he was very quiet. And then we find out there's 8 bodies in the basement.
That's right.
Yeah, I think that is just a terrifying mentality to that.
It is, because you really don't know. And, you know, especially in a place like New Orleans, because New Orleans is a place, and it always has been from the very, very beginning, any port city in particular. I mean, New Orleans matches. You look at some of that stuff.
Welcome to Memphis. We're just up the river from you. Yeah.
Memphis as well. This is a place that people could come, get off of a ship, change their name.
Yes.
Get a room for rent. Pay by the week, pay in cash, get a job, getting paid under the table cash, doing, you know, sweeping, back in the 1800s, sweeping floors for a saloon, you know, washing dishes perhaps in later cultures, you know, get a room, rent it by the week, pay in cash, don't have a bank account, you can live completely under the grid, and when they disappear, if nobody knew you were here in the beginning, they're not going to know when you disappear. You never existed.
Or who you were before, or who you turned into later.
That's exactly right.
Because, you know, most of these legends and stories stop a little after World War II. When we began getting the census and the government began moving towards modernity, when we began getting computers and credit cards and the modern conveniences we think of today. And that was one thing I had to address in my books was, how would you do that? You know, you can't live 100 and, you know, you can't just disappear and change your name these days. But you could if you had a process. So here you had to have somebody that was not only adept at finding a victim and getting rid of the evidence, but you also had to have somebody that was adept at appearing and disappearing in the modern world. And that's a lot more difficult than it sounds. So, but there's still the fact that people can do it.
Before COVID,
people still do it.
People can do it. I mean, people still do it. I mean, you drive down the street in New Orleans, and I'm sure you have the same thing with homeless people in Memphis. And this is not to say anything ugly against homeless people, but let's face it, when you drive down the street, do you know their names? Do you know who they are? Do you know where they're from?
Mm-mm.
Do they know who they are half the time?
Oh, I'll freely tell you, you don't know who you're talking to.
No.
So,
you know, it happens. It happens all the time. So it's scary. That's what the scary part is because in that respect, the vampire is real. It's very, very real.
You know, is there somebody out there willing to do harm to you? Yes. Is there somebody willing out there to victimize you? Absolutely. And are there people out there with the ability to basically, for all intents and purposes, appear and then disappear out of your life?
Oh, absolutely.
More or less,
it happens all the time.
Very scary, very scary. Even in 2020, we're still talking about this topic, and it's still applicable.
It's just as creepy.
Yeah, it's very scary.
It always is. It changes with the ages. But anyway, it was fun, and we ran out of time. So, Alan, tell him real quick. You've got two really fabulous vampire novels, Galen and
Brenda.
Dark Chances.
Yep, Brenda's Dark Chances.
So,
yep.
Tell them a little bit about how to get your novels.
All they got to do is just pop over to darkoakpress.com or go to amazon.com. Go to Dark Oak Press, hit the catalog. You can look up all the stuff we've done. If you don't like one of my books, pick up one of Kalila's.
That's right. I've got some, but take both.
Yep, get two. They're small.
They're a lot of fun. Yep, get two. But I've read both of his vampire books, and they are fabulous. But want to thank you guys for coming out and joining the show tonight. We appreciate you guys tuning in, and we hope you will check in with us next week. Thanks so much. Have a wonderful night.
Good night.
Stay safe.